Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available online for free at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, and university professor and zoologist, Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumphs. In our last reading, we covered chapter 14, entitled The Desert Shall Rejoice, when the Veiths return from their one-year world trip and Walter makes the decision to give up his work at the university and enter into full-time ministry. Despite opposition, their conference welcomes Walter, offers him a job, and ordains him as an Adventist pastor. They remember their promise to move to the country, and they put their house up for sale and found a beautiful property with many acres close to the mountain with streams and fertile land and a dilapidated farmhouse 100 kilometers from Cape Town. Despite making a huge profit on the sale of their house, they still did not have enough to buy the farm, and they joined with a young Adventist couple to purchase it. After many months of really hard work, they transformed their portion of the land into a beautiful home with a vegetable garden, fruit trees, and running water. Unfortunately, after a few years, their partners joined a strange faith called Israelites and turned against the Veiths, claiming that they had the right to the property because they first approached the former owners and forced the Veiths to sell out to friends of theirs in the same faith. Walter and Sonica moved higher up on the property to the desolate mountainside, and after months of very hard work and living in a tent, they built themselves a new home with gardens, fruit trees, and a beautiful view of the valley below. During their time there, Walter was invited to East Germany to a very interesting church made up of Adventists from all around East Germany who had not submitted to the compromises that much of the church was undergoing in Europe, and was welcomed with open arms by the congregation and many others who came to the lectures. From there, he went to Wales, where he was invited to speak. But while there, as he went to the hall where the lectures were to take place, he heard the sound of bedlam and learned that the Adventist youth gathering was having a daily rock concert. However, there was one youth standing outside the door who told Walter that his Jesus was not in that hall. They began to talk, and the next day, the young man invited over 20 of his friends to talk with Walter. And by the end of the meetings, there were over 100 youth who gathered to listen to Walter instead of the rock music. In that same town, while walking around, looking at the sights, a crane with a bucket of cement lost control and knocked Walter off his feet, hitting him on the hip. The strange thing is that as he lay on the ground in pain, no one stopped to help him. People even stepped over him, and the crane operator didn't even seem to notice the accident. Fortunately, he was not seriously hurt and suffered no broken bones. Satan was at work again. Then one day, their daughter Tanya came to visit, And when she was about to leave, Sonica realized that she hadn't prayed with her and ran to do so. She tripped and went flying as if a supernatural force had sent her airborne. She was very seriously injured, breaking her hip, cracking her pelvis, and other serious fractures in her femur. She had to be operated on with many complications, ending up having to stay off the leg for 6 months and using crutches. She spent the next few months in extreme pain and suffering depression. Then they went to visit Frenchie, and when they were leaving, he asked Walter to come with him to Botswana, where he had been invited to preach. Walter refused to go, but on the way back, following Frenchie, as they were about to turn to go to their different destinations, they had an accident which totaled their car, and they were left with no choice but to accompany Uncle Frenchie and Aunt Emma to Botswana. Frenchie called it a Jonah experience, but it surely turned out well, for they were invited to go to Loma Linda a few months later. However, before that, they had camp meeting to attend, then a trip to Egypt and the biblical lands before heading off to California. Meanwhile, Sonica's affliction was getting worse, and she had great trouble and constant pain. Her friend Elsie, a trained medical missionary, called her a few times and emphasized that she was impressed to come and treat her, even though she did not know about the accident. She came a few days before the camp meeting and treated her with hydrotherapy, herbal teas, and shortly she no longer needed painkillers or sleeping pills, and soon they were off to Egypt and the biblical lands. That trip required much walking, and although she did it, when they got to California, she was again in considerable pain and could do nothing more than sit in the audience while Walter and Uncle Frenchie gave their lectures. A young lady approached her and told her that she would like to help her, since her husband was an orthopedic specialist and she had heard about the accident. Sonica accepted, and it turned out that his specialty was exactly what she was suffering from. And with one injection, her problem was almost immediately resolved. She could walk again without the use of a crutch, and the pain disappeared. God had worked in her life once again through a series of events, starting in Botswana, continuing with her friend's help, and ending up with the specialist in California. Dear listeners, don't forget, you can download this book for free from clashofminds.com as we pick up the story today in the final chapter of this book entitled The Home Stretch. Testimonies, Volume 9, page 231. The night of trial is nearly spent. Satan is bringing in his masterly power because he knoweth that his time is short. The chastisement of God is upon the world to call all who know the truth to hide in the cleft of the rock and view the glory of God. The truth must not be muffled now. Plain statements must be made. Unvarnished truth must be spoken in leaflets and pamphlets, and these must be scattered like the leaves of autumn. Working on the farm had become too demanding for me to continue to travel with Walter. Surviving in a semi-desert meant you had to water every day in the scorching summer heat. We were inundated with requests for him to speak at different churches, and he was spreading himself very thin to try and accommodate everyone. He had accepted an invitation to do an outreach series in the Johannesburg area, and he was flown up to the church where the lectures would take place. Many interesting conversations took place during his visit, which confirmed to him that the messages had reached even the secret chambers of the high officials, and he was humbled and grateful that God's protective hand was always over him along the treacherous paths that he was walking. After his first lecture, he noticed a man waiting patiently for the people to leave before he asked Walter if he could talk to him alone. They sat down in the church pews, and the man started giving him startling information. He said he was in the Secret Service of South Africa and was on his way to meet with the state president at that time. He continued to warn Walter that the government was aware of him and were watching him, but encouraged Walter that he should continue with what he was doing because many in high places were listening and taking note of what he was preaching. Later, during that outreach series, a lady approached him and told him that she was on a foreign ambassadorial staff. From time to time, she was asked to accompany the ambassador, and in her studies and preparation for meetings, she came across a lengthy file on Walter. But she also reassured him that he should not be discouraged and should continue preaching because everything he says is the truth. One hot, high-veld afternoon, Walter received a phone call from an internist at one of the large hospitals. She had been watching some of Walter's DVDs and knew that he had knowledge of the workings and beliefs of Freemasonry. And because one of her patients, the Grandmaster of the Masonic Lodge, was in a serious condition in hospital, she was concerned for his soul and hoped that Walter could speak to him. When he arrived at the private ward where the man was lying, he noticed a woman standing beside the man's bed, as well as the internist and a nursing sister. As he was entering the room, the woman became decidedly agitated. "You will not come in here with that book. Get out," she said angrily. Walter realized that she was referring to the Bible he had in his hand. "Madame, I'm here at the invitation of this gentleman, and I will not leave unless he tells me to." The woman was beside herself with anger and asked the man, who turned out to be her husband, whether he really intended to talk to Walter. He confirmed that he wanted him to stay, and with that, she stormed out of the room. "I apologize for my wife," the man said with a weak voice. For the next hour, Walter was able to show the Grandmaster that he had inside information of the secrets of Freemasonry, which were entrusted only to those with the highest degrees in the organization. As Walter opened the scriptures to him, the man acknowledged that they indeed worship Lucifer and not Christ. But when Walter explained the plan of salvation and that he needed to come out and leave Freemasonry, the Grandmaster became sad. "I can't leave," he said softly. "I can't follow Christ. I can never be saved." Walter noticed a small chink in his armor. "Why can't you? If you agree that what I told you is the truth, then what is holding you back?" "It's too late. I have too much blood on my hands." It's never too late. God will not turn you away. The grace of God is greater than your sin, Walter said reassuringly. The man was too tired to continue the conversation, and thanking Walter for coming, he asked him if he would be willing to speak at his lodge, should he recover from his illness. Walter said it would be a pleasure, then greeted him and the internist, and returned to the church where he had to get ready for the evening lecture. He never heard from the Grandmaster again, but a few months later, the internist was baptized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. She had been taking in everything while Walter spoke to her patient and decided that what she heard was the truth. Perhaps the divine appointment she had made was for herself. That evening, a young Adventist girl came to Walter after his lecture and asked him if he would speak to her friend. She was going to break off their relationship because he was involved in secret societies. Walter could see that the young man was in a serious predicament. He explained that he loved the girl because she was so different from all the girls he had known, but that he was an assassin, trained by the military. He was desperate not to lose the girl, but he knew that it was almost impossible to break free from such organizations. Walter prayed silently for God to help him with the right advice. He told the young man to repent before God and to break all ties with the organization. Then he should follow God in all his ways and leave the consequences to him. Failing to do this, he would have to leave the girl and never see her again. As they left, Walter knew that the young man would be agonizing over what decision to make, and he never heard from the couple again. Like the story of the rich young ruler who was not willing to sell all he had and follow Jesus, Walter feared that it was too hard for the young man to sever ties with that which bound him to this world, whether it was money, power, or fame. Matthew chapter 7 and verse 14. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. I was grateful when Walter returned to the farm. It was hard to cope on my own with all the challenges, and working in the hot sun caused me to get feverish with chills in the evening, which I realized later was probably sunstroke. I had also hurt my right shoulder and had to do everything with my left arm, which again put strain on my weak leg. But by God's grace, everything was still running smoothly when Walter returned. He had hardly started to rest his tired mind from the constant mental stress when, due to pressure on the German leadership from church members, Walter was again summoned to meet with one of the division presidents in Europe. Now, it was back to packing and preparing for the flight to Europe, where he flew to Switzerland to meet with the European division leaders. From the outset, the president launched his verbal assault, accusing him, amongst other things, of being sensationalistic in his presentations. Why do you continue to give these lectures after we've told you to stop doing it? You must be doing it for the money, he said cynically. To accuse Walter of doing God's work for money was like waving a red flag in the face of an African buffalo. Yes, I fly to the ends of the earth for weeks and months away from my family. I sleep on the floor or don't sleep at all. Get eaten alive by mosquitoes and fleas. Get sick with food poisoning, thrombosis and pneumonia. Get criticized and threatened by my own people. So yes, I do that all for the money, was Walter's sarcastic reply. The president ignored Walter's indignant words and proceeded to tell him once again that he should refrain from speaking about all his conspiracy theories. Again, he tried to explain to the president that what he preaches is supported by the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, but it seemed that the president was not going to be convinced. As he left the president's office, he was greeted by much friendlier brothers and sisters who lifted his downtrodden spirits and gave him hope again that the apple wasn't rotten to the core, as he had thought. After his banning, following his preaching on the Bible translations in Germany some years earlier, the ban had been lifted, and he was again invited to speak in Germany. Little did he know that this trip would lead to one of the most traumatic experiences of his life. In his lectures with regard to the end-time Israel of God, he mentioned that most of the Jews in Israel today were no longer the descendants of the biblical Judeans, since they were exiled and scattered among the nations. He explained that most of the modern Jews were, according to recent research, the descendants of the Khazars, so that neither by lineage nor by their religion can they be the Israel of God, because the Israel of God, according to Paul, were those that were in Christ. Thus, only those who are in Christ, whether Jew or Gentile, are the heirs of salvation and the spiritual Israel of God. Galatians 3:29. And if ye be Christ's, then ye are Abraham's seed, and heirs according to the promise. Individuals among the Jews will be converted, but as a nation, they are forever forsaken of God. 1st SG, page 107, paragraph 1. This was the opportunity his enemies had waited for. It wasn't long before a man from a liberal German Adventist magazine made a case against Walter for alleged anti-Semitism. For Germans, this was a serious hate crime, and police were deployed to confiscate Walter's videos from the church, and an investigation was conducted which lasted almost a year. Walter was told not to leave his home for long periods of time and to be ready to fly back to Germany should he be summoned to appear in court. Our supportive Adventist brethren offered to appoint a lawyer to represent Walter in Germany, but he said he would wait and trust in God. Shortly after the debacle, a prominent German magazine published an article which confirmed everything Walter had referred to regarding the heritage of the Jews. But still the accusers refused to withdraw the case. We were anxiously waiting for the outcome and were expecting the worst. But then, the person in charge of the investigation sent the videos to a Jewish commission for evaluation, and the report indicated that although they did not agree with everything Walter said, there was no anti-Semitic sentiments advocated in the lectures. The case was then thrown out of court. But lo and behold, Walter was banned by the German church leaders for a second time from speaking in Germany. Liberal Adventist magazines climbed on the bandwagon, and articles were sent into the world spreading vindictive misinformation about Walter and his ministry. To one of these articles, I wrote a response, which was summarily removed from their webpage. His accuser was later appointed by the German Adventist leadership as a pastor, and also became the vice chair of a European Ecumenical Council in Europe. He also acknowledged that he regularly attended Jesuit retreats and was seen bowing to the altar in an ecumenical gathering. We then understood why he tried to get rid of Walter. Mark 13 and verse 9. But take heed to yourselves, for they shall deliver you up to councils, and in the synagogues ye shall be beaten, and ye shall be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony against them. Mark 13 and verse 13. And ye shall be hated of all men for my name's sake. But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved. We were relieved that he was vindicated, and that by the world. Even though he was banned by the church, the police, the investigative team, as well as the Jewish Commission, all had the opportunity to hear and watch the truth. God has mysterious but nerve-wracking ways to reach people. However, the battle was not over yet. Appeals from leadership in Germany were sent to the Biblical Research Institute of the General Conference, and attempts were made to have Walter deposed of his pastoral credentials. The charges against him were handed down to our division, and he was summoned to speak with the president in his office. Every complaint against him was discussed, and each time Walter was able to defend his position from the Bible and the writings of Ellen White. Eventually, the president had nothing more to say, and he asked Walter to write a report as an answer to the allegations, explaining why he preaches what he does, which the president himself would forward to the General Conference. See the addendum for the letter. With that, he washed his proverbial hands, and that was the last we heard of him. Whether his letter ever reached the General Conference leadership, we don't know. But in his letter, Walter appealed to his brethren of the church he loved and respected not to give up the faith in the eternal truth, and to heed the counsels for our time from the pen of inspiration. He longed for his church to understand where he comes from, and he wished that he could work in harmony together with his fellow believers all over the world, as it was in the time of the early Christians. But he received no response to his letter, not even an acknowledgement that anyone received it. As we reflected on our ministry, we saw a lonely road scattered with thorns, but fortunately, also with precious flowers. I was again reminded of the words of the messenger of the Lord. Do not listen to Satan's lies, but recount God's promises. Gather the roses and the lilies and the pinks. Talk of the promises of God. Talk faith. Trust in God, for He is our only hope. He is my only hope. I have tremendous battles with Satan's temptations to discouragements, but I will not yield an inch. I will not give Satan an advantage over my body or my mind. Daughters of God, page 146, paragraph 2. We decided to gather the flowers in God's garden, not to yield an inch, and to continue with our mission. Our 10 years of living on the farm came to a sudden end. Walter was asked by the conference to evangelize the northern parts of South Africa. But in order to be able to do that, we would have to move there. On Sabbath at our local church, Walter mentioned to a brother who was also farming in that area that he couldn't leave me running the farm on my own for a year or more. And if we both moved there, what was going to happen to the farm? The brother said he had a plan, and that he would visit us the next day to discuss the matter. We were expecting him to say he would appoint someone to run the farm for us. But to our surprise, he had a very different idea. I will buy your farm. What do you want for it? He was not someone who beat around the bush. Walter and I looked at each other. Give up our farm, that was our safe haven, far away from the vindictive words and actions of our enemies. Our farm that we had built up from nothing, with fruit trees bearing delicious fruit, wheat crops on the land, organic vegetables, and abundant sweet water that turned the desert into a lush oasis. We were not ready to leave all this behind. But then in the back of my mind, I could hear God say, "What doest thou here, Elijah? I have been very jealous for the Lord of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken thy covenant, thrown down thine altars, and slain thy prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." I could hear Walter thinking, "Yet I have left me 7,000 in Israel, all the knees which have not bowed unto Baal, and every mouth which has not kissed him." The Lord answered. God kept to his promise, and our faith in spiritual Israel was restored as he opened the way for us to work with the churches in the northern parts of South Africa, where we discovered the 7,000 precious gems in the vineyard of the Lord. We agreed to sell our brother the farm, and as he got into his pickup truck, he said, "Oh, and by the way, you must leave everything. You may only take your personal belongings, but leave every plate and cup, every piece of linen, every little picture on the walls, everything on the farm." Lord, I thought in dismay, really everything? I may not even take the antique lamps we have collected over the years from little country stores? Not even the authentic African paintings? All my linen and the 48-piece pottery set that I made myself years ago? As I turned to the Bible for answers, I understood what God's will was. Yes, everything was God's answer. You can't go into battle if you're not focused on your task. Uriah wouldn't return to his wife when King David tried to coax him. He went straight back to join his fellow warriors in the battle, leaving everything behind. And remember what happened to Lot's wife when she looked back? I didn't want to turn into a pillar of salt. I closed the Bible. I had found the answer. We packed up our few belongings, greeted our friends on the neighboring farms, and left for the unknown, where God had something exceedingly more valuable in store for us. After frantically searching for a suitable place to make our new home, we settled in a small town in the Bushveld close to the Kruger National Park. We were intrigued by the many private game farms and thatched roof lodges with wild animals roaming free on large portions of indigenous Bushveld, and the hot summer rainfall climate with its characteristic thunderstorms. In January, temperatures could rise to more than 40 degrees Celsius, with hardly a winter to speak of, and thousands of hectares of land in the area covered with mango, banana, avocado, macadamia, and citrus trees. The only problem was we're about 6 hours' drive away from Johannesburg or Pretoria, where most of our evangelistic work would take place. But at the time, it seemed like a small price to pay to be able to live far away from the crime and the hustle and bustle of two of the largest cities in the country. For 3 years, we virtually worked 1 week in the city, and the next week went home just to do our laundry and pack our bags, and then back to the city again. The work was exhausting, but we were often reminded of the words of God's messenger. "The cities are to be worked from outposts," said the messenger of God. "Shall not the cities be warned? Yes. not by God's people living in them, but by their visiting them to warn them of what is coming upon the earth. Letter 182 in 1902. At the same time, we also accepted invitations to overseas campaigns as well as to other parts of the country. During one of our trips to Canada, we experienced the wrath of the devil himself. At the ministry we worked with, we experienced many trials and conflicts, and it seemed to us that the problems were insurmountable. We were discouraged and felt it was almost impossible to continue with the work under those circumstances. One late afternoon, as Walter was working on a lecture in a depressed state, something happened that would strengthen our faith and give us the courage to continue. We were both sitting on the bed in the little house provided for the speakers of the ministry. I was reading, and Walter was working on his lecture called Path of Obedience, when suddenly he gasped loudly beside me and rolled off the bed, clutching his side in agony. "What's wrong?" I asked anxiously, and rushed over to where he was lying on the floor. He was unable to answer me and just kept groaning. Thinking that he was having a heart attack, I ran to the kitchen and fetched some cayenne pepper mixed with water and helped him to drink it. But the pain would not subside, and he was struggling to breathe. I knelt down beside him and started praying for him, and after a while, he was able to catch his breath again. I helped him onto the bed, where he remained in a fetus position. I phoned some of the members of the ministry and told them what had happened, and within a few minutes they arrived. We all knelt around the bed and prayed, and then slowly the pain in his side started to ease. When he was able to speak again, he explained to us that it wasn't his heart, but that it felt like someone had plunged a dagger into him. We knew immediately that the attack was not physiological, but spiritual. Satan tried to discourage us, hoping that we would cancel the meetings and return home. We prayed together again, and then they left. But then a couple of minutes later, we received a phone call from one of them, which gave me goosebumps. "You will never believe what happened," the young lady said. "We had just turned into the main road when suddenly a rock fell from the sky right in front of the car. We couldn't stop in time and ran over the rock. And when we got out of the car, we couldn't see a rock anywhere. It was gone. But the car is badly damaged. The whole chassis is bent." "The rock is gone?" Walter exclaimed. "Nowhere to be found. And we searched everywhere. But that's not all. A woman came running out of one of the houses, and she asked us if we were okay. We said yes. But then she said, 'We heard the rock fall. But come inside. We were just speaking to the spirits.'" Walter looked at each other and instantly knew that God had allowed the attack to remind us that we are not fighting against flesh and blood, and that Satan is going about like a roaring lion to destroy the work and discourage God's servants. God requires his servants to walk in the light and not cover their eyes, that they may not discern the working of Satan. They should be prepared to warn and reprove those who are in danger through his subtlety. Satan is working to obtain vantage ground on the right hand and on the left. He rests not. He is persevering. He is vigilant and crafty to take advantage of every circumstance and turn it to his account in the warfare against the truth and the interests of the kingdom of God. It is, I saw, a lamentable fact that God's servants are not half awake as they should be to the wiles of Satan, and in the place of resisting the devil, that he may flee from them, many are inclined to make a compromise with the powers of darkness. Pamphlet 123, page 48, paragraph 2. The demanding schedule started to take its toll on us, and we often got sick while traveling. Walter, who had weak lungs from contracting tuberculosis as a child, battled with bronchitis and pneumonia on almost every trip. Besides that handicap, he also developed flight thrombosis on one long flight. A huge man on the flight was sitting next to him in the seat, downing one vodka after another until he fell asleep, snoring loud enough to scare a lion. Walter was stuck in the window seat for hours, unable to wake the man or climb over the colossal whale-like figure, and consequently, he had to suffer in silence with the throbbing pain in his leg through all his lectures until he got home. One day, as we were resting for a few days in our bush home, our thoughts went back to the man who, on request of the conference, followed Walter wherever he presented his lectures and recorded and edited the videos for distribution. Why don't we ask Fanny to start a video ministry here in our town? Then we can distribute to the African people at affordable prices. It's too expensive for us to buy from the ministry in Canada, I asked as I was packing our belongings for our next trip. That could work, but I don't know if he will move here. It's so far away from everything. And besides, we don't have any money to fund such a project. But let's phone him and hear what he has to say, Walter answered. And with that, he picked up his phone and called Fanny, who immediately said, if that is God's will, then he will come, even though we only had 500 Rand in the bank account created for the project. In a short while, his wife quit her job and they moved to our town. I mostly handled Walter's correspondence with churches and individuals who requested him to speak in their countries, and in one email to a brother in the USA, I mentioned that we were starting a DVD ministry in South Africa. Within a few months, the kind brother had collected funds from his friends, and they blessed us with a donation that enabled us to start the ministry. In 2015, we were able to attend the 60th General Conference session in San Antonio. There was a buzz of anxious anticipation in the air in view of the issues to be discussed and voted on by the delegates from all divisions of the church. Many opposing views were presented on the proposed updating of the fundamental beliefs of the church, and it was clear that delegates from the liberal divisions and institutions were dissatisfied with the suggested addition of the words literal and recent to explain the church's position on the six-day creation more clearly. The apparent reason for their liberal arguments was to incorporate the evolutionary beliefs of not only the scientific world, but also to come more in line with the beliefs of other Protestant churches, as well as that of Pope Francis, who, according to NBC News, said that the Big Bang Theory and evolution in nature do not contradict the idea of creation because God was not a magician with a magic wand. The General Conference president supported the addition of the word recent, as he said, essentially, this version of the belief was brought to the floor of the 2005 General Session. I personally endorse it. This wording will help us in our work. You can put a spin on any word such as recent, but it means not old. There is no room for theistic evolution. I will tell you, I personally believe, based on the spirit of prophecy, that the earth is approximately 6,000 years old. If our brethren would have studied the words from the pen of inspiration, which foretold this shift away from the Bible towards science falsely so-called, would take place, there would be no confusion and doubt in the biblical record among God's people. Infidel geologists claim that the world is very much older than the Bible record makes it. They reject the Bible record because of those things which are to them evidences from the earth itself, that the world has existed tens of thousands of years. And many who profess to believe the Bible account are at a loss to account for wonderful things which are found in the earth, with the view that creation week was only 7 literal days, and that the world is now only about 6,000 years old. These, to free themselves of difficulties thrown in their way by infidel geologists, adopt the view that the 6 days of creation were 6 vast indefinite periods, and the day of God's rest was another indefinite period, making senseless the 4th commandment of God's holy law. Spiritual Gifts, Volume 3, page 91, paragraph 2. The debate on women's ordination was equally heated, as was the change in the wording in the fundamental beliefs regarding the spirit of prophecy, from "her writings are a continuing and authoritative source of truth" to "her writings speak with prophetic authority." But although there was a definite change in nuance, God still had the last word. Despite all the efforts to change our position, as was also the case at the Faith and Science sessions, none of our long-standing biblical positions were compromised. In July 2017, we once again flew to Canada for the annual recordings for the Canadian ministry. One of the events that was planned was to travel to Europe to tour the Reformation countries. The upcoming event of celebrating the reconciliation between Protestants and the Catholic Church was scheduled to take place on the 31st of October 2017, which was to indicate to the world that the 500-year-long separation was over, and Walter was eager to have the information available to the public before that time. At all the important sites, recordings were made of Walter recalling the historic events of the persecution of Bible-believing Christians during the Dark Ages. An amazing footage was filmed in the Vatican, the city of Trent, Worms, Wittenberg, Augsburg, the Wartburg, the Gutenberg Museum, Torre Pellice, and the Piedmont Valley, Prague, and many more interesting historical sites. However, toward the end of a stressful and increasingly demanding tour, I ended up in hospital when we arrived home. My heart started beating in absurd rhythms, and the electrocardiologist discovered that one of the main nerves in the heart was missing, and that 3 other smaller ones had taken over the work. But now they were competing with each other and causing havoc on the stress. I wasn't able to sleep much for the following few months and had to cope with recurring arrhythmic occurrences for the next few years. But I was only thankful that it hadn't happened while we were traveling. The year 2019 was the beginning of an amazing new adventure. God had opened a way for us to secure land up against a mountain range where we could grow our own vegetables again, some 30 kilometers from the only small bush-veld town. It was only about 2 acres, but big enough for us. Soon, smaller pieces of land adjacent to ours became available, and God impressed upon our minds to build a facility for our ministry with a small studio in an old workers' college and some housing for the ministry workers. We felt an urgency to make accommodation available, as well as to plant vegetables and fruit trees and get it done as speedily as possible. The ministry grew, and soon there was a demand for more workers to help with the editing. Trusting in God to supply all our needs, we did not advertise any positions in the ministry, and faithful to his promises, the Lord himself organized an unplanned meeting between Fanny and Martin Smith and his wife at a camp meeting. They were on their way to do mission work in Georgia, but felt impressed that God was changing their direction, and soon the couple joined us in the African vineyard of the Lord. At that stage, we were still visiting places where Walter was invited to give his evangelistic series. Amidst all the challenges, God lifted our spirits and showed us that he was still at the helm of our little ship. Our visits over the years to different countries and the many churches were witness to the loving care and miracles of God. Through his divine guidance, it was possible for Walter to speak at Walla Walla, where the spiritual formation theology had infiltrated our Adventist university, and equally remarkable was his invitation to speak at our most liberal institute, La Sierra University, on creation versus evolution, despite the strongest efforts to prevent the meetings from taking place. In Maine, the conference president refused to let Walter speak at the church camp meeting, even though he was formally invited to be a speaker. But this did not deter the church members. A group of people then decided that they would have their own camp meeting, even though they had no venue, no tent, no cheers, and little money to pay for everything, and to fly Walter to Maine. In a short while, all these were provided through unbelievable miracles, and the camp meeting was a blessing to many people, including Walter. Toronto was another divine appointment. We were at the airport after having attended the ASI meetings when we heard that the event in Toronto, where Walter was to be the speaker, was canceled. The group of pastors who had invited him were suddenly threatened with disciplinary action by the union president if they continued with the meetings. Once again, the church members refused to cancel the event and proceeded to rent a large Muslim hall, 5 times the size of the hall that was previously available for the event. 2 ladies sent out messages, and soon the hall was filled to the brim. People were queuing to ask Walter questions, and many non-Adventists attended. A hardened atheist and evolutionist even asked Walter to pray for him right there in the hall. The curse turned into a blessing, and many more people were reached than was possible under the initial arrangements. Wherever we encountered opposition, the battle issues were the same. Those who had opposed Walter's messages over the years were in one way or another simply opposed to the messages sent by God through the spirit of prophecy. They continue to disregard, in spite of more than ample evidence, her warnings and revelations pertaining to the health message, the creation account, and the cosmic week, the Antichrist as manifested in the papacy, the Jesuit and secret society connections in the realm of ecumenism, entertainment, and spirituality, and that these principles are all firmly rooted in the Bible and not just the ramblings of an uneducated, demented, epileptic woman, as some have suggested. This unbelief is steadily growing like a cancer, and satanic tears of doubt regarding the character of the Son of God and God's prophetic gift for his church have been sown among the wheat. The great controversy is real and will continue raging until the closing of time on this earth, when Christ will bring an abrupt end to it all. Our little mustard seed ministry began to grow rapidly. Walter and Martin started working together on presentations, and in early 2020, the What's Up Prof series was born. It wasn't long thereafter that the greatest game changer of modern times was launched into the world, and we suddenly realized why God had urged upon us to get the infrastructure for the ministry in place in a very short time. More than 2 years of COVID madness and confusion led to immeasurable mental and physical suffering and death. Governments all over the world introduced lockdowns and mandates, and all organizations, including the religious bodies, were brought in harmony with this trend. This led to untold hardships, loss of jobs, coercions, isolations, and separation between people and groups, and bringing division in the church and families. It was claimed that the science was settled, and that any deviation from the described course was contrary to the love your neighbor principle. Such tactics had been used before, and for thousands of years had caused division and pain. In fact, this principle was first employed in the courts of heaven when Lucifer introduced his divide and conquer strategy. When he was eventually thrown out of heaven, having caused the ruin of billions of angels, he very successfully implemented the same modus operandi here on earth. Many winds of doctrine also entered the church during this time, but we persevered in the ancient paths and would not let these distractions blow us off course. Romans 16 and verse 17. Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned, and avoid them. Due to travel restrictions, we were no longer able to fly to Canada for recordings and meetings, and it was decided to start a separate ministry in South Africa. Our God of wisdom had planned everything ahead of time. Our team had just settled into their homes, and the first set was ready in the studio when the lockdowns were implemented. Through God's providence, we were able to continue with productions when everything else had come to a halt, and our messages went out weekly on the media networks into homes like the leaves of autumn, all around the world, where people were confined for weeks and even months. Thousands of people, even hundreds of thousands, were reached through the internet, whereas before we had to travel great distances to reach a few hundred. However, as was to be expected, again, some of the leadership in the worldwide church were unhappy with the programs, and Walter was once again summoned to discuss some of the issues with a conference committee on Zoom. Again, liberal Adventist magazines and professors at our colleges climbed on the bandwagon and announced Walter as a time setter for quoting the spirit of prophecy regarding the age of the earth, and that the determined 6,000 years were soon to close. Since the evolutionary thinking of the world had taken hold of their minds, they ignored the fact that the church and the pioneers had from the beginning believed the cosmic week principle, and in a 6,000-year period for life on the earth, followed by 1,000 years of rest in heaven. Christ, in the wilderness of temptation, stood in Adam's place to bear the test he had failed to endure. Here, Christ overcame in the sinner's behalf 4,000 years after Adam turned his back upon the light of his home. Confrontation, page 32, paragraph 1. On Jordan's banks, the voice from heaven, attended by the manifestation from the excellent glory, proclaimed Christ to be the Son of the Eternal. Satan was to personally encounter the head of the kingdom which he came to overthrow. For 4,000 years, ever since the declaration was made to Adam that the seed of the woman would bruise the serpent's head, he had been planning this manner of attack. Confrontation, page 78, paragraph 2. In Walter's presentation, it was made abundantly clear that God had not revealed to us exactly when the 6,000-year period would end or when Jesus would return, for no one knows the day nor the hour. But the approximate time was to give God's church the incentive to get ready and to warn of his soon coming by sending the 3 angels' messages to all the world to prophesy again before many peoples and nations and tongues and kings. Amidst trying to survive the spiritual onslaughts, we were also trying to survive the physical challenges. Living in a subtropical area, we have a constant battle with monkeys, and to a lesser degree, baboons, who feel it is their perfect right to break into our greenhouses and help themselves to our fresh vegetables and fruit, which we painstakingly cultivated amidst thunderstorms, fierce winds, and heat waves. These reckless primates have no remorse when they manage to destroy your crops and then jump onto a branch high up in a tree where they mock you, knowing full well you can do nothing about it. And after having experienced the destructive force of a troop of baboons passing through my house, clearing out everything from my refrigerators and cupboards, smearing the tasty morsels all over the house, and defecating on our beds, and as a bonus, leaving taps open in the kitchen to flood the house, I was paranoid about keeping them away from my house. One afternoon, I noticed a troop of samango monkeys in our trees, and as I ran outside to scare them away, we heard a loud thumping noise and assumed a monkey had jumped from a high branch onto the roof of our outbuilding. We grumbled about how to deal with the monkey issue and then forgot about it. About a week later, Walter started complaining about a strange odor in the water. But because my sense of smell had never been any good, I said I couldn't smell anything. Then our daughter started complaining, but we thought that since the water level in the borehole dropped in the winter, it could be sulfurous algae emissions, and planned to have the borehole specialist look into it. But when our gardener complained, I said to Walter, "You should go and look if there is anything in our water tanks. Perhaps a lizard or a mouse got into the tank." "There is no way that a mouse can get into the water tank. It can't be that," Walter said pensively as he walked up to the tanks beside the outbuilding. Within a few minutes, he came rushing back into the kitchen. "You will not believe what happened," he almost shouted. "There is a decomposed monkey in the water tank." "Wow, what?" I looked at the large batch of food I had just cooked for us for Sabbath, using the water straight from the tanks. I started feeling sick in my stomach as I realized that I had been faithfully drinking my 2 liters of putrefied monkey water every day for more than a week. If only I had reacted on my instincts when I heard the strange thumping noise. The large Samango monkey evidently landed on the lid of the tank, his weight shattering the brittle plastic, and he fell through the opening into the water, where he drowned. A lizard or mouse indeed. Our Sabbath lunch was dumped unceremoniously, and we were back to bread and avocado. After a heavy dose of charcoal, we showered under the hosepipe in the garden, which contained municipal water, and left the dilemma of how to clean out the water tank for Sunday. It was clear that Satan had tried his very best to thwart every effort we made to live a healthy physical and spiritual life. After the lifting of the COVID mandates in South Africa, we were strongly impressed to expand our ministry to reach the many people who suffer from lifestyle diseases, as well as those who have been affected by COVID, whether physically or mentally. We are advised by God to combine the health ministry with the Word of God in order to reach the people with the gospel. And as we, as a team, prayed and put our foot in the Jordan, not knowing how our mission was to be realized, God parted the sea of doubt, and we embarked on an exciting new journey. He opened the way for us to start a health center, as well as a training center for evangelism, and great was our joy when people from our church started to come forward to help with the development of this important mission. The minister and missionary worker are to minister alike to soul and body in their need, and thus the entire work is to become one united medical missionary evangelistic work. Loma Linda Messages, page 37, paragraph 3. The principles of health reform are found in the Word of God. The gospel of health is to be firmly linked with the ministry of the Word. It is the Lord's design that the restoring influence of health reform shall be a part of the last great efforts to proclaim the gospel message. Medical Ministry, page 259. However, almost 3 years of constant pressure, lack of rest, and onslaughts from all sides caused Walter to succumb to severe gastritis numerous times. And since there was no time to recuperate, we found ourselves in a whirlpool that was sucking us deeper into a vicious cycle. We were living according to the health principles as far as possible, and yet, with all the stress, our bodies were struggling to cope. And unfortunately, we were not getting younger either. After giving the work our all, I also started feeling weak with a nagging pain in my abdomen. But scans revealed nothing except for a couple of blood tests that showed low iron levels. I tried to be brave and continued my work, but found that I wasn't able to get through even half the day without feeling exhausted. My health deteriorated by the day, and I was losing weight fast. My doctor sent me for extensive tests, and eventually it was found that I had a bleeding growth in my abdomen, which had to be removed surgically. From the many surgeries I'd had before, it was no surprise that something like that had developed. It was a major operation, and because I had become so weak from the apparent years of constant blood and iron loss, the surgeon wasn't sure if I would make it through the surgery. He gave me intravenous iron and blood transfusions in the hospital before he proceeded with the operation. When I woke up, I felt like I was dying. I was throwing up for days and nights from the anesthetic and intravenous medication, which my body was not used to. For years since my hip fracture, I had never taken any medication, and my liver reacted violently against it. The second day in ICU, I was wondering if these were my last moments on earth, and I mentally prepared myself for the worst. But then I heard someone entering my room. I opened my eyes and saw a small, frail-looking nursing sister move softly towards me. This was very unusual, since the nurses in that hospital were often rude and loud and insensitive to the needs of the patients. Without saying a word, she moved silently to where my handbag and container with my toiletries were. I watched as her hand went straight to the pockets where I kept everything, as if she knew exactly where they were. She washed my face and gently brushed my hair without saying a word, carefully avoiding the tubes attached to my face, and then carefully turned me on my side, washed me, and proceeded to apply body lotion to my back and arms, and rearranged my pillows. I closed my eyes in gratitude for this sweet spirit and unknown kindness. But as I opened my eyes again to thank her, she had already left, as silently as she came. The weight of responsibility and care upon Walter was heavy, and he struggled to continue to work out programs and record them for the ministry, and at the same time, traveling 125 kilometers almost daily to the hospital where I was admitted. During the nights, while I was unable to sleep from pain and weakness, I would read from the little Spirit of Prophecy book I had taken with me. Many times I wondered if I was ready to die, if I had lived my life according to God's will, and I agonized over many failed opportunities and mistakes I had made. But the words of King David to his son comforted me and gave me a reason to continue fighting. 1 Chronicles chapter 28 and verse 20. For the Lord God, even my God, will be with thee. He will not fail thee nor forsake thee until thou hast finished all the work for the service of the house of the Lord. The surgeon was amazed at my speedy recovery, and after 10 days in hospital, I was discharged. After a tiresome, painful journey, we arrived home, where Walter, with concern written all over his face, tucked my emaciated, fragile figure into the bed. That night we prayed, thanking God that I was still alive. Did you know that I'm like a cat? I asked. A cat? Yes, I had 9 lives. 9 times I could have died, but each time God turned a near disaster into a victory, I said. I'm grateful you're back again. It's lonely when you're not here, he said, as he squeezed my hand. I'm grateful too. I didn't think I would make it this time, I said. If you knew 37 years ago that all these things would happen to you, would you still have said yes to God? Walter asked as we lay on our backs in the dark. I probably wouldn't have, because I didn't know God then. Jesus tried to tell his disciples what would happen to them, that most of them would be killed, some beheaded, some stoned and even crucified upside down like Peter. But unfortunately, they didn't understand. And if you could go back in time, what would you change in your life? He asks again. I would change nothing, except where I saw my children suffer needlessly in this cruel world. But for myself, I know that God allowed me to suffer when I made mistakes, and He allowed me to suffer even when I didn't make mistakes. It is all part of His plan to teach me to trust Him and to fit me for His kingdom. Without the trials, I would not have seen myself as God sees me, and I would have worn my own garment to the wedding. And if I should die before the Lord comes, I believe that I have run the race. I have fought the good fight, and His grace will be sufficient for me as long as I continue to dwell in the secret place of God. 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 17. For our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. As the little boat bumps against the jetty and jolted back to reality, the jumping fish returned to their murky homes in the lagoon after we had so rudely disturbed them with our bright, piercing light. I cannot help but think of the millions of people who are hiding in their own dark waters, shut away from life above the surface, just wishing for an opportunity to lunge upward towards the light and into the boat. And all we have to do is shine that light. I smile at Walter as he helps me out of the boat. That was a wonderful experience, I say, as I breathe a sigh of contentment. Having reflected on the last 37 years of our life, I saw that it was good, very good. Cast the net on the right side of the ship, and ye shall find, says our guide. They cast therefore, and now they were not able to draw it for the multitude of fishes. John 21, verse 6. The end of chapter 15 and the end of the book, Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. Dear readers, we have one more chapter to go. It is an addendum to this book, and it is a copy of the letter that Walter was asked to write to explain why he preaches the way he does. His letter is entitled An Appeal to the Brethren, and this will make our final reading in our next session.